Hello, my name is Lynn Arnold, and I bring a regular series of videocasts on different topics of concern to myself and to our community. And in recent times I've been really concerned about an episode about the toxic algal bloom situation here in South Australia. You will have seen press reports about this, and it's been of increasing concern to us as a community. And while it may have eased a little bit now, the real issue is what will happen in the time ahead. Are we facing an uncertain future? The story sort of broke in March when there was a build-up of mysterious foam at Waipinga, and some people who were using the beach were feeling sick at the time. And then very quickly there were more reports of dying fish and ultimately sharks on the shore dying, and then stingrays acting out of character, and then massive species deaths in different parts of South Australia. With the bloom that seemed to be ever growing, and at one point was said to be about the size of Kangaroo Island in our coastal waters. So as I say, this concerned me greatly. I'm a former Minister of Fisheries and was clearly concerned as somebody who's known about the fishing industry in this state. But more importantly, I was more generally concerned about the health of our environment. Was this a kind of canary in the mine situation that we were facing? So I thought I really needed to talk to somebody who knew what could give us some advice about what was going on. And so I asked Dr Mike Bossley, AM, if he would join me today to talk about the situation. Now, Mike is a cetacean research expert. He's an environmentalist. He was the director of Greenpeace Australia some time back. He established the Australian Dolphin Research Foundation. In 2005, he was South Australian of the Year. And he's been actively involved and remains actively involved in concern about our marine life. So as I say, I thought I would ask him to join us today. Mike, thank you very much for coming on the program.
You're welcome, man.
Now, you do have a background in marine environment, and particularly a knowledge of our South Australian marine environment. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about, I mean, we had these horror stories about the algal bloom, but in fact, algae are an important part of our biosystem, aren't they?
Yes, in two forms. So there are microscopic algae, which are part of the dangerous one that's causing havoc at the moment. And then there are also what's called macroalgae, which most people call seaweeds. Mm-hmm. But the microalgae, otherwise known as phytoplankton, they're responsible for producing about half of the oxygen on our planet. So
half of the oxygen on
every
the planet.
second breath you and I take is thanks to these tiny, tiny plants in the ocean.
Goodness me.
Just occasionally, some of them go bad, and that's what's happened here at the moment.
So phytoplankton are an essential part, clearly an essential part of our biosystem. But you say there are some then that go berserk.
There are thousands and thousands of different species, and they're all in a kind of a dynamic relationship with each other in the ocean. Some are only in tiny, tiny numbers, others in larger numbers, and the dynamic changes over time according to weather and all sorts of things.
Now, so there are thousands of different species of phytoplankton, only some of which are toxic to us and to fish species. Where do they fit, though? I mean, they must have some sort of natural place in the biosystem, or are they always a bit of a curse on the system?
Oh no, when they're in small numbers, they're inconsequential, really.
Yeah.
They provide, lots of things eat them. Mm-hmm. So they're part of the ecosystem, and under normal circumstances, they just exist and don't cause any problems. But if you get some perturbation to the system, then their numbers can take off and they can dominate and cause.
So
havoc.
it's an imbalance. Correct. That causes the real problem.
Correct.
Now, when we do have that imbalance or perturbation, as you referred to it, what are the sorts of problems that they cause?
Well, there are three main problems that they can cause, really. With the toxicity, they can produce a thing called a brevitoxin, which is actually a nerve poison. So they can change the behaviour of organisms. They can end up coating the gills of fish and basically suffocating the fish. Or when they, at night, and when lots and lots of them eventually die, because they all have fairly short lifespans, they deplete the water of oxygen. So that can be a triple whammy, basically.
So, coat the gills, change the behaviour, deplete the oxygen supply. I mean, they're fairly dramatic effects. Now, so in this particular one, we've actually seen examples of all three of that, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, yeah.
So, and so that's why the sharks have had their gills covered, the stingrays have behaved oddly, and then the oxygen has resulted in, well, for example, the seahorses dying, and I think something like 200 species have been identified in the dieback.
Yes.
Tell us about I mean, we'll talk about the shark one in a minute, but the Treasure Cove episode, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, Treasure Cove is a little place on the southern York Peninsula that belongs to the Butler family, and I've been going there since 1980, taking students for marine ecology courses. And I fell in love with the place over the years, and eventually managed to work with the current owner, Pam Bennett, who agreed that it would be a good idea to make it into a marine sanctuary. And as far as I know, it's actually the only private marine sanctuary in Australia.
Wow.
It's only tiny, but it's great. So no fishing allowed there. Everything's just allowed to be natural. And I love the place dearly, and I've been documenting the changes over time and photographing it and so forth. Anyway, when this bloom took off, I was concerned about what might be happening down there. So I decided to drive down with my friends Steve and Sandra, who have been with me on this project from way back, and Pam, who was wanting to come in as well. So we went and decided to go in and snorkel around and have a look and see what, if anything, had happened there. And before we got in, we were up at the top looking down, and we could see a couple of eagle rays. Well, we thought the eagle rays actually turned out to be smooth rays, just flapping around in the water, and thought, oh, that's interesting. Went down, and they're usually very shy and move away as soon as you get near them. But Sandra got in first, and she went in one direction, and Pam and I went in the other direction. And pretty much simultaneously, Sandra and Pam and I both had these smooth rays come at us and bring their tails are like kind of scorpions' tails. They come up behind them, and they've got a big barb on them. And Sandra managed to evade the one that was after her. Unfortunately, Pam did get one in her arm, and one reared up at me and just missed my face by wow. 10 or 15 centimetres. So it was really scary.
Yeah.
Particularly with Pam there bleeding quite profusely. So we managed to all get out of the water and get her to hospital and where she got treated. But
so, I mean, you'd come and you'd seen these rays from above. You'd known from previous experience that they would go away as you went in snorkeling in the water, but the contrary happened. Exactly. It was a really serious episode that was taking place.
Yeah.
So at the time, what was your first reaction when that happened?
I was confounded, to be honest. I'd never ever experienced anything like it. And I've been in the water for over 50 years in South Australia and snorkeled and dived with rays hundreds and hundreds of times, and never had anything like that happen. So yeah, it was anxiety, I guess, about why they were doing that, what did it mean for the ocean, and also, of course, anxiety for Pam.
So when did you start to think that this may be related to the algal bloom episode, or when did you start connecting dots here?
I don't think there was one particular time that I kind of had a realisation. It just gradually crept up on me that something weird was happening, and the more I thought about it, the more the weirder. There was no kind of epiphany as such. It was just just a gradual realisation.
And when did this actually happen?
Oh, I can't remember now. Probably second week of April or something like that. Yeah.
So, because we'd had the first foam started to appear at Waipinga in the middle of March.
Yeah.
So this is just a few weeks later.
Yeah.
And then things evolved from there.
Yeah.
What's your understanding as to the extent of this episode that we've had?
The dimensions of the bloom, you mean? Or?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. As far as we know, it's still pretty much extending from the bottom of the Fleurieu Peninsula across to Kangaroo Island, and then in a big kind of a wedge up to at least as far as Edithburg, and probably, as far as Port Vincent, maybe even north of that a bit, and as far down as Marion Bay, so a big swathe of Gulf St Vincent.
Now, this episode that you came across with the stingrays, was that distinctive to rays, or have there been other episodes of strange behaviour reported on other species?
Well, some sharks have been behaving very strangely as well. In fact, the day before we went snorkeling in Treasure Cove, we had been walking along an adjacent beach, and a shark had come in within 2-3 metres of the beach, which I'd never ever seen before.
Wow.
And there are other examples of similar things happening elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. So we have this massive bloom. Do you, from your knowledge over many years of observation and your knowledge of the history of the marine environment in South Australia, have we had an algal bloom of this size before?
Not that I'm aware of. There have been small ones. There used to be really regular ones in the Port River when I first started studying dolphins there, but they were confined to an area, the size of 3 or 4 football fields, kind of thing. There's been the occasional one over in on the other side of the Spencer Gulf in Coffin Bay, and probably other ones around, but of no significant consequence.
Mm-hmm. So this really then is something quite exceptional.
And certainly in 50 years that I've been knowing, and haven't read anything of any other previously to that.
Now, I know that, of course, not only is the serious environmental impact, it's having an economic impact, because some of the oyster fisheries have as a precaution, have stopped harvesting, and other fishers generally, I guess, must be getting very concerned about what it's going to mean for their catches.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely potentially got huge impacts for commercial fishing. Recreational fishers are almost certainly going to be impacted as well. Tourism, whatever.
Certainly for tourism too, you're quite right. I mean, you wouldn't be wanting to go in the water too easily until... Now, the recent storm, there was some hope that would break it up. Do you know what happened with that?
No, I don't know that anybody's been able to do the testing to find out exactly the result of that storm. I must admit I was very optimistic the storm would break it up, and it would pretty much neutralise it. But unfortunately, I don't think that happened. And with this week weather that we've got coming up, which is relatively still and warm, I'm worried that there's a very good chance that the algal bloom will reassert itself. I hope I'm wrong, but that's...
Yes, certainly we all hope that's the case. But I know that PIRSA, I think, are currently doing some testing on that. But now, so the biggest you've ever seen in 50 years, what are the causes? Why are we facing this situation?
Well, there's kind of proximal causes and kind of background causes. Really the 3 things that they need are still water, so that they can aggregate. They need nutrients, and the nutrients come from what's called the Bonnie upwelling, which brings lots of food for the algae up from the bottom and for them to be able to eat, and relatively warmer water. Those 3 things. And I think the background to it all is almost certainly climate change exacerbating these things.
I mean, that's been the sort of Damocles issue that's been hanging over us as we see these reports. Yeah. Is this a climate change issue, or at least is climate change a significant contributor to it?
Yeah. Well, with all of these things, you never know whether it's weather or climate. There's always the dynamic of whether it's just a short-term thing that can happen any time, or whether there is this kind of wave that's pushing it along, i.e. a change to the climate in general. And that certainly seems to be a plausible explanation to me.
Before we pursue that matter a bit further, can I ask an inexpert question? You said there are thousands of species of phytoplankton. Why did the toxic ones bloom in this situation? Why didn't some nice ones decide to prosper?
Yeah, well, in most circumstances, the nice ones do prosper. Mm-hmm. It's just it's a chance thing. It's with so many things happening there, it's just a luck, bad luck in this case.
Now, on this issue of climate change as opposed to weather patterns, I read a report that the ocean, the seas, the waters have been 2 degrees warmer than usual. And that seems a massive variant.
It is, yeah. And with many species, not just plankton, but fish, cuttlefish, squid, whatever. They have very narrow tolerances of temperature that they can breed in, that their eggs can survive in. So that 2 degrees warming can be ecologically very significant. And it's not just happening here. The whole of the east and west coasts of Australia are actually having this marine heat wave as well. And not just Australia. In fact, they've been having one in New Zealand for several years now, and in Europe. There's a toxic algal bloom happening in California as we speak.
Oh, really? Yeah. I'm just thinking about these other issues, and I mean, I've heard that phrase, a marine heat wave. I mean, that's an interesting concept, but we don't think about that, do we?
No, it's normally we think of water as cold, but and I guess relative to land temperature, it is cold. But certainly when it warms up, it has an effect, and that changes everything.
Mm-hmm. So, just coming back to the nutrient issue, did you say these nutrients are coming from the seabed?
Yes.
Being stirred up?
Yeah.
Is that due to the temperature gradient causing movement within the water?
It's a natural thing that happens every year. Okay. You have this thing called the Bonnie upwelling, and there are upwellings in other parts of the world as well. This just happens to be our one, where currents bring the cold, nutrient-rich water from the bottom of the ocean up to the top, and it makes the phytoplankton bloom because they've got all the fertilizer in effect, and then the zooplankton, which are little tiny shrimpy things, get to feed on them, and their numbers grow. The whales go in, and the whales eat them all, and so
the biosphere works very nicely if it's all done in a proper balance.
Exactly.
So at the moment, there's been a sort of a surge of this nutrient that has caused the imbalance.
Well, it's not so much the surge of the nutrients that's caused the imbalance. It's just the combination of the still water, the temperature, and the nutrients in combination have led to the blooming of this one particular species, so that it's dominating the situation down there.
Okay, so now the storm may or may not have broken it up, and there's a question mark hanging over that. The issue, however, would be that even if it has broken it up, if climate change is at the nub here, then we are at risk of seeing a recurrence.
Yeah, that's the really worrying thing. I mean, having a one-off event, you can think, well, that's awful, but we'll recover. But if we're going to get these things more frequently, there's less and less opportunity for the ocean ecosystem to recover.
So what then becomes the solution, or are we faced with having to change the way in which we deal with our coast, that there would be long-term economic impact and long-term tourism impact and just long-term impact upon the very fabric of the environment?
Yeah, there's basically two strategies to deal with things like this. One is adaptation, which is trying to find ways of dealing with the changes to sea level rise or the marine heat wave or whatever it might be. Or the other one is to in fact try and mitigate the causes of this marine heat wave, and that's to try and do everything we can to decarbonise the world. So,
big picture issues here, and this is all part of the need to address climate change in the best way we can by mitigation wherever possible. Are there any types of things that could quite specifically be looked at in terms of the marine environment, or is it still just dependent on that bigger picture?
Yeah, I don't know of anything that we can specifically do to modify the marine environment to make it accommodate the warming temperatures of the planet. Is really, as far as I know, and I'm by no means an expert on this, the only thing we can really do is to try and reduce the emissions that we put into the atmosphere at a global level.
Yeah.
It's no good just Australia doing it. It has to be done at a global level. And in South Australia, our government has been extraordinarily, will be leading in trying to reduce our carbon outputs. But unfortunately, nationally and internationally, not so good.
Yeah, yeah. Now, forgive me for the next question, which may seem a dumb question, because I'm not expert in this matter. Would there be any possibility of trying to replace the particular phytoplankton with encouraging another phytoplankton to replace it, or would our problems just be of a different nature?
I don't think there's any way that can be done. It's inconceivable to me that we can farm the algae in a way that we will encourage some species to proliferate and others to not. I think that's
beyond our capacity and especially when you think about the order of magnitude of this covering a space about the size of Kangaroo Island. Am I correct in that?
Correct. Yeah.
Now, I know that you've made mention of a private marine park down the bottom end of York Peninsula. A good mutual friend of ours is actually, he's quite passionate about the need to extend marine parks. Do things like that offer any thing, or are they just good in their own right, but they don't necessarily offer any solution to this issue?
No, well, they are good in their own right, but I think they do offer not a solution, but that they offer some protection. The healthier the natural marine environment, the more able it is to tolerate any changes that come in the climate change or whatever it might be. So that the healthier you are, the more resistant you are to having a disease take you out, which is kind of what the algal bloom is.
Now, one of the other things which I understand is that the whole system of South Australia, right from the southeast right through to the Great Australian Bight, across to the West Australian border, we really need to consider it as a whole. There's a whole concept involved there. Could you just describe that a bit?
Yeah, around, probably nearly 10 years ago now, a group of marine biologists got together and were thinking about our temperate marine waters that exist from basically Sydney down to Tassie and around to about Perth, and how they all of those waters have basically had a similar ecology. And they came up with this concept of the Great Southern Reef to contrast it with the Great Barrier Reef. And when they did the analyses, they ended up discovering that, in fact, the Great Southern Reef is much more important economically and in other ways than the Great Barrier Reef is. But the Great Barrier Reef gets all the glory, and the Great Southern Reef is still relatively unknown, except among marine biology nerds.
So just this Great Southern Reef stretches from where to where, and how does it identify itself? How do we?
The characteristic of the Great Southern Reef is algae. The Great Barrier Reef is characterised by corals. There's hardly any plant life on the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Southern Reef is characterised by marine plants, by algae, and particularly a thing called golden kelp, and that's the signature plant for the Great Southern Reef. So it's a totally different kind of ecosystem to the Great Barrier Reef, but enormously important for fisheries, for tourism, and just for the general.
So it would be an important nursery for fisheries, and this particular plant life variety that takes place there, has that been under threat in its own way?
Yeah, it's the algae have got temperature tolerances as well, so they can't cope with too much heating. But the other thing that's happening, particularly on the east coast of Australia and down to Tasmania, is that the warm temperatures that are caused by the East Australian current, which take the warm water down along the east coast and down to Tasmania, have led to the profusion of sea urchins, which munch up the algae, And so they're losing lots and lots of algae, partly because of the warm water, and partly because the change to the ecology by the proliferation of these.
Is something similar to that happening in the South Australian waters?
No, not yet. We've been very lucky.
So
We're a kind of what biologists call a refugia. We've got the Lewin Current coming down the west coast, Western Australia, and the east coast has the Eastern Australian Current, and they both go down the side, and they curl around the bottom a little bit. But in South Australia, we have been so far pretty immune to the effects of those. But I don't know how long that'll last.
I mean, we do have sea urchins in South Australia,
Yeah.
but not in the kind of plague issues
Exactly.
that you're talking about over there. So, Mike, it's a big picture issue that you see here. There can be some helping the general health of the environment by having marine parks. That would have some benefit, but it's a really big picture issue, you're saying.
Oh, it's a big picture and it's a little picture. I was just down at Marion Bay yesterday running a forum for the people down there about the bloom, and people were crying. And people that live down there are crying because they're seeing the ocean and the beaches that they love, everything dying, and it's awful. They've probably saved up all of their life to have a move down there when they retire, and suddenly their little heaven is no more. But it is also a big picture, of course.
Yeah. And actually, I know what you mean about that. I was devastated to hear about Waipinga, because that's been for our family, has been a very, very important beach, not for swimming, but just as a place of natural beauty. And now to hear that is being affected, and I know others likewise in other areas, quite apart from the economics of it, it's just the emotional pull of it.
Yeah. We in Australia, and probably in most countries that have got a coastline, are really, really passionate about our beaches and our coastlines, and it's kind of gets at the heart of being an Australian to suddenly have this aspect of our environment suddenly become despoiled and dying.
With this, just coming back to the current algal bloom that's been the size of Kangaroo Island, what is the risk of it spreading up Gulf St. Vincent and up Spencer Gulf? Or is there some degree of those areas quarantine themselves somewhat?
There's certainly serious concern about it spreading up Spencer Gulf, and there have been apparently some small outbreaks in Spencer Gulf and Tumby Bay, for example. But the last I've heard, there's still small outbreaks, but there is definitely a chance if these autumn conditions continue for another few weeks, that it could work its way up into Spencer Gulf, which is very important for commercial fishing.
Absolutely, yes.
And it could certainly spread up to Adelaide as a possibility as well. I go walking my dog on West Beach every few days, and I'm very carefully looking for evidence, and so far I haven't seen any evidence of anything happening there. So I've been greatly relieved about that.
So just winding up here, a serious issue may have had some benefit from recent storms. Winter may bring some benefit, but if we have a mild winter, then the risk is that it won't. And the issue is not only that it's a larger size than we've seen before, but it could actually get larger if the wrong conditions apply. And the more general, longer-term issue brings us back to the big questions.
Yeah, it does. There are immediate reactions that the government can and should be making in terms of gathering as much evidence as possible about what is making up the bloom and how it's spreading and how the currents are affecting it and all those kinds of things, just as a way of trying to understand it better in case it happens again. But certainly, it's to me, it's climate change. That's got to be the overwhelming concern about all this. That's certainly what keeps me awake at night.
Well, Mike, thank you very much indeed for coming in today. I really appreciate you talking about this. As I say, it's really concerned me to read these reports because I feel that we're talking about something very serious here, not just an episode that we'll remember in years to come, rather an episode that may in fact continue to be a part of our environment.